Hi, my name is Max, and I can't believe that I'm still talking about this, but it's been 6 months, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem like the resolution is anywhere near, but it's still important to talk about it, and I still get asked a lot of questions pretty much anywhere I go. So yeah, when I get asked all these questions about Russian-Ukrainian war, the one that you're not allowed to call war in Russia, but a special military operation still, I just wanted to make this video in an attempt to clarify some information for people who do not speak Russian or Ukrainian, but who are curious about the current situation and how is it being perceived on both sides. Obviously, there is a significant divergence between how Western media covers the events and how they are being viewed from the Kremlin. That makes it difficult to understand Russian intentions. My only goal is to try to be helpful and provide insight, not to push any particular point of view. I don't have that kind of agenda. So, the questions that I've been asked a lot. What Nazis are they talking about? The president of Ukraine is Jewish. Apparently, this one still confuses a lot of people. As you know, hopefully remember that launching the invasion on February 24th, Putin declared that his goal was to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. A very common misconception about the whole term Nazis in this context comes from people drawing parallels to the Nazi Germany and their anti-Semitic rhetoric. In the post-Soviet world, the term Nazism is used in a, more colloquial, broader sense, and it is basically applied to far-right groups, especially ones who openly espoused xenophobic and anti-Russian rhetoric. I mean, there are some right-wing militia groups in Ukraine, like the Azov Battalion, whose logos bore a suspiciously close resemblance to those used by Nazi Germany. How much actual power and influence did those groups have by the end of February 2022? Obviously, enough in the eyes of Russian propaganda to justify the invasion, but I don't know, it's somewhat like justifying an attack on the US because there is the Daily Stormer, or bombing the UK because there are skinheads in the UK. It's awful, but that's just the reality of it, that these terms, Nazism and fascism, became politicized accusations with a very general application. And it's actually a bit ironic in that sense, because Russia itself resembles a fascist state more and more with each passing year. Why these words? Anti-fascism has increasingly become a central idea in Putin's Russia, reinforcing a growing tendency to identify the modern country with the Soviet Union, as you guessed. The thing is that the Red Army's victory over Nazi Germany in 1945 is still a big deal in Russia and a big source of national pride, and Putin's regime has been putting a lot of emphasis on it. As you probably know, Putin sees the USSR collapse as one of the biggest tragedies of the 20th century, so he uses the anti-fascism ideology and the Victory Day as a way to basically unify post-Soviet space. And this is why you can sometimes see how in some former USSR countries people ban the so-called victory military parades or even symbols commemorating the victims of that horrible war, just in an attempt to distance themselves from what Russian government has been using in its propaganda. Do Russians know what is actually going on? So, a lot of Russians get their news from TV, which is all propaganda at this point. Independent media has been shut down, and lots and lots and lots of social media has been blocked. Yet, pretty much everything is still accessible throughout the usage of VPN services. It's just the question of competence in technology. A lot of people have no idea how to use any of those services, especially those who do not live in bigger cities. They live in like rural areas or older population. So they're not very technologically sophisticated, to put it mildly. And I feel like at this point, everybody's just so sick and tired of TV and TV propaganda that a lot of people I know stopped watching TV at all. So they don't really read a lot of news. Do Russians actually support Putin? Well, a lot of people actually do, especially older population. But keep in mind that Russia never really had a proper democracy at any point of its existence. And then generations of Russians haven't experienced any kind of stability for a very long time. And they would go over massive chaotic changes, and they would lose everything they had through no fault of their own. So the 90s, for instance, was an absolutely horrendous period for Russia. The import and export system was a mess. People had nothing to eat, and sometimes they had to wait for many months to get paid while continuing to go to work. And then speaking of inflation, inflation was like 84%. 84%. And Russia always had this idea that all it takes is a strong leader who would come and fix everything. So in the early 2000s, the gas prices were going up drastically. So at the very beginning of Putin's first presidential term, the quality of life in Russia would improve radically. And that's how Putin became to be associated with this man who brought stability and strength to Russia. He did so by nationalizing crime and corruption, but that's secondary. Do Russians actually support war? I would love to say no, but unfortunately, there are a lot of people who bought into official propaganda. They do believe that Russia is on some kind of saving mission, but I really want to reinforce that lots and lots and lots of people do not support it. They are just as devastated and shocked as everyone else, but they cannot express it openly in public out of fear for their own life and safety. A lot of people who publicly voiced their opinions, they left the country if they had such ability, and they don't know if they're planning to come back. And then another reason is that people who do not have the money or the luxury to say what they think, especially people who do not live in big cities like Moscow or St. Petersburg, they see themselves having very little power over what's happening. Also, in remote areas of Russia, there's hardly any foreign press, so it's very unlikely for any protests that would occur to receive any media coverage. So you can go to jail for that. People would just put their own lives at risk. I mean, also, I don't think it's very beneficial for the US or European media to show how many Russians disagree with the current state of things. What you kind of have to keep in mind is what kind of agenda is the media pursuing. So let's say when someone says that there was a mysterious poll conducted in a mysterious way that revealed that 80% of Russians support the war, what is it that they're actually trying to tell you? It's good for escalating the conflict, right? And then who would benefit from escalating the conflict? Does it just happen to coincide with the news about some military help or pushing some financial aid for Ukraine? Most of it will most likely be lost in one way or another, but that just happens at every war, right? Are Russians affected by sanctions? Ooh, a million-dollar question. Moderately, yes, and probably way less than everyone assumed they would. But it is clear as day that these sanctions are going to affect regular people way more in the long run. The problem is that imposing numerous sanctions on Russia actually allowed Putin to unite people even more so under this old conspiratorial theory that the West has always been on the campaign to undermine Russia. That's his jam. You know, Russians are constantly being told that they aren't well liked overseas. And then another thing is some sanctions have so many loopholes that makes one wonder why were they put in place to begin with, and raise the question of who do they hurt more? The fact is Russian oil and gas revenue is soaring, and Russian ruble is stronger now than it was before the war. And then, yes, there is the ban of imports of crude and petroleum products from Russia, but here's the thing. Fuels are often made from blends of different products, such as gasoline, diesel, and chemicals. It's very hard to determine where exactly did it come from. So obviously there are lots of ways to bypass bans like that. For example, that's how a refinery owned by Indian Reliance Industries has been buying a lot of Russian crude. It's a very simple scheme, really, but it's brilliant. So the way it works is an oil tanker to carry a cargo of alkylate, a gasoline component, departs from the port in India without a planned destination, because they can do that. They can just go and swim around in neutral waters and whatever. Somewhere in neutral waters, it meets a Russian crude tanker, because that one can do exactly the same. Over there, once they met, they transfer Russian crude, refine it, turning it into a more democratic crude, clearing it from all Russian authoritarian particles. And then an Indian tanker updates its records with the US port and discharges its cargo somewhere in New York, where it sells the no longer Russian product, a blended product on the short-term market. So, yeah, things like that. So as long as there is a will, there is a way. It's just more complicated and expensive now. And it's not just Russia who pays the price. Traveling has become much harder and more expensive, but it's still doable. For Russians who are rolling in it, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. There are no Hollywood films in theaters, so I guess that's a big bummer. They banned Batman and that new movie with Brad Pitt. So they kicked Russia off SWIFT system, but there is still PayPal in crypto. There are fewer European goods available in different stores and supermarkets. Lots of companies left Russia, and for pretty much everything that's left, prices went up quite significantly. But because they went up pretty much everywhere, both Russia and Europe or US have the carte blanche to blame everything on each other and macroeconomic factors, and yes, inflation. Overall, I would say, fortunately or unfortunately, Russians are psychologically and mentally prepared for this whole situation to continue. They've been beaten up enough from left, right, and center for the past couple years, since 2014, I want to say. So they kind of feel so jaded that nothing really phases them at this point. For the most part, the majority of Russians have very little trust in their government. And I really want you guys to understand that. Everyone in Russia thinks that the government is corrupt and inefficient, and the only difference comes from some people supporting and believing in Putin, and others opposing him, putting their lives at risk, probably, by doing so. So there you have it. I hope that answers some of the questions and sheds light on the current situation. It's a mess. It's complicated, it's very disconcerting, and people are suffering on both sides. If you would like to ask some more questions, please do that in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer them as well as I can. And if you'd like to help Ukraine or Ukrainian refugees, I'm going to leave a set of links in a description to this video, so you can do that, or you can always do your own research. Again, thank you so much for watching and listening and paying attention to this subject.